Now we are going to look at a formula which is called the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula is used to solve a quadratic equation, which looks like this. So we have a number times x squared, a variable squared, plus a number. So notice a and b, they are what we call constants, but they are just numbers. But x is unknown, x is a variable. A and b are the numbers we know. And times another variable x, and plus another numbers constant. So x here, these two x's are unknown, but a, b, c, they are known. So let me specify a and b and c. These are given. These are numbers we know. Equals 0. On the right side, it has to be 0. So if it's not a 0, you have to move everything to the left to make right side 0 in order to use this formula. So let's look at example. We can have, let's say if we have maybe x squared plus 5x plus 2 equals 0. So the number in front of x squared, there's not a number, which means it's 1. So this 1 here corresponds to a in the formula. Remember, a does not include the variable x. A is just the number in front of x squared. And the b is the number 5. And c is the number 2. And so that x squared corresponds to x squared, and that x corresponds to x. And this example is different from what we did in the previous section. Previously, we had x squared equals a number, say 36, or x squared equals a number negative 10. And in these cases, we don't really have x. We only have x squared. There's no x, and then everything else is a number. So for that case, we could do the special way, because special case has special solutions. We took square root to both sides. But in this case, we can't do that anymore because we have x. If you take square root of x, x squared, we cannot get rid of the x. So if you try to move this to the right, and you're going to get x squared equals negative 5x. Move 5x to the right, becomes a negative, and subtract 2. If you take square root, you are still going to get x under the square root, which is not the solution, because in the answer you cannot have x in your solution. So that doesn't work. And so that tells us we have to do a new way. Previously we learned factoring. If you make one side 0, you factor the non-zero side. But unfortunately, this trinomial is not factorable, and we can see very quickly because we can do the box thing, try to factor, and because there's only one way to factor 1 times 1, one way to factor x squared, and one way to factor 2. It's positive 1 times positive 2. We could do negative 1 times negative 2, but it's not going to work either. We can see 1x times 2, it's positive 2x, and 1x times 1x give us positive 1x, and when we combine them, we're going to get positive 3x. If we change both of them to negatives, we're going to get negative 1x, negative 2x, and we're going to get negative 3x. It's not going to give us that 5x in the middle either. Say if we change both of them to a negative, we're going to get negative 1x and negative 2x, and that gives us a negative 3x. It's not going to match that 5x. And notice that that's the only way to break down the first term and the only way to break down the last term. So it's not going to give us 5x. So which means this is not factorable. Previously, when I give you homework assignments, I always try to give you the trinomials that are factorable. But we need to realize that there are a lot of trinomials that are not factorable. We cannot factor them. Okay, so which means the previous method we did, trying to factor the left-hand side and trying to set each factor equal to 0, won't work anymore. So what should we do? Here we have a formula, which is called a quadratic formula, that can be used to solve this type of question. But the disadvantage is that we have to memorize this formula. So the formula given is x equals a division sign. On the top we have negative b plus or minus, because x squared usually we have two solutions. Square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. And on the bottom, we have a easier expression 2a. So this is a formula that we need to remember. And so when we solve this quadratic equation, so we call it example 1, we can plug in there. I'm going to call this one example 2 because it's similar to the second problem in the homework. Okay, so we can plug in the numbers. First of all, make sure the problem given is in this format. That is, we have 0 on the right hand side. We have something times x squared plus something times x plus a constant number. So here it tells us a is equal to 1. That's the number in front of x squared. B is equal to 5. That's the number in front of x. C is equal to 2. That's the number without any variable next to it. So now let's plug all the numbers into that formula. We get x equals, the top it's minus negative b. B is, so this b right here in our case is a 5. Plus or minus square root of b squared. So in this case b is 5 squared. Minus 4 times a. A is 1 in our case, times c. C is 2. Now we have on the bottom 2 times a, which is 1. But we need to simplify this. So the bottom 2 times 1 is just 2. But on the top, there's a negative 5 plus or minus. Under the square root, we have 5 squared, 25. Minus 4 times 1 times 2, it's 8. So 25 minus 8, that gives us 17 under the square root. And so we got two answers. One of them is negative 5 plus radical 17 over 2. The other is negative 5 minus radical 7 over 2. So that would be the answer, two answer solutions. And notice that square root 17 is already in the simplest form. If this one, say if you got like square root 24 or square root something, you have to reduce it. Make sure you always reduce your answer. Now let's look at another one. Say we have square root x squared. We can put a number in front of that. 3x squared. By the way, that if this negative, if the problem given is not in this format, say if it's given as x squared plus 5x equals negative 2, and you will not be able to use the formula directly, because if you want to use the formula, it has to be 0 on the right side. So you can add 2 to both sides, and then you're going to get x squared plus 5x plus 2 equals 0. Negative 2 plus 2, they cancel, but you will get a number 0. It's not, you're going to have nothing on the right. You're going to have a 0 on the right side. Then you can use the formula. So when you do the homework, if you may have to do this step if there's a number there, to have to get rid of that number. So now let's look at example 1. Suppose we have 3x squared, negative 3x squared plus 2x plus 5 equals 0. So first of all, it's already in the format we need. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. The right side is 0. So that tells us this number is a, this number is b, and this number is c. So we can plug everything into the formula. So x equals 2 times a. Let's look at the formula here. 2 times a. A is negative 3. And on the top, it's negative b. B is 2. Plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a, negative 3 times c. Now we simplify what's under the radical sign. So we have negative 2 plus or minus square root of 2 squared is 4. And negative 4 times negative 3, that's positive 12. Positive 12 times 5, that gives us positive 60. Positive 12 times 5. So on the bottom, we have negative 6. And continue to simplify the number 4 plus 60, square root of 64. And we know square root of 64 is equal to 8. And this is a little different from example 2 we have, because well, after we work out the number with the radical sign, we got a square root 17, which cannot be simplified further. But here we got square root 64, which can be simplified to 8. And if you get the number situation like this, you should continue to simplify this further, because we can actually add a -2 and 8. Over here, we cannot add a -5 and a square root 17 or subtract them because they're not matching radicals. But the numbers we can add. So we can separate into two cases, -2 plus 8 divided by -6. And if we simplify that, we're going to get 6 on the top, 8 minus 2, 6, divided by -6, which gives us -1. So that's the first answer. We can also do -2 minus 8, because it could also be minus, divided by -8. So we got -10 divided by -6, which can be simplified to 5/3. We have two answers. One is -1, the other is 5/3. Notice that this problem, this trinomial, is actually factorable. So if you use factoring, you can also solve it to get the same questions. But unfortunately, there are a lot of trinomials that are not factorable, like in example 2. Then you cannot factor it. You have to use the quadratic formula to do it. So quadratic formula works on any, can be used to solve any quadratic equations. But factoring only works on the factorable trinomials. Now let's look at example 3. So we may have, sometimes we may have one of the, let's say the last number missing. So we have 6x squared minus 5x equals 0. Notice that this one is also factorable. It's not trinomial, but this is GCF type. You can factor x and set each factor equal to 0. But we want to practice using quadratic formula to solve any quadratic equation. So in this case, so what will be a and b and c? So apparently the number in front of x is still going to be a, so that's our a. The number in front of x squared is a. The number in front of x is b. But there's not a number for c. You can add a plus 0 there, so that means c is equal to 0. Because adding 0, it's not going to change the equation, but which means that c is 0. So let's plug everything into the equation. So on the top, it's -b. We have to be careful here because b itself is a negative number, -5. This minus sign comes from the formula. In the formula, there's a minus sign. If b itself is negative, then you will have another minus sign. So you're going to have -5. So this negative sign comes from the -5, but this minus sign comes from the formula. Plus or minus square root of b squared, which is -5 squared, minus, this minus comes from the formula, times 4 times a. In our case, a is 6, times c, but c is 0. So we're going to put 0 there. And divide by 2 times a. Now let's simplify the number under the radical sign. On the bottom, we have 12. On the top, -5 will become a +5. Plus or minus square root. Notice that -5 squared is 25. And -4 times 6 times 0, anything times 0 will make it 0. So this whole part right here will become just this number 0. So it's like 25 plus 0, which gives us 25 under the radical sign. Now we can continue. We know square root 25 is just equal to 5. So we have 5 plus or minus 5 equals, or divided by 12. Again, this can be simplified further because they're both whole numbers, integers. So we can do two cases, 5 plus 5 divided by 12, which gives us 10 over 12, and that is equal to, can be simplified to 5/6. Or we can do 5 minus 5 over, so that would be the first answer for x, 5/6. And the other case, or x equals 5 minus 5 divided by 12. We know 5 minus 5 is 0. 0 divided by 12 is going to be 0. Be careful, any number divided by 0, so you cannot do 12 divided by 0 undefined, but you can do 0 divided by 12, that is equal to 0. So there are two answers. x is either 5 equal to 5, 6 or 0.